Machini's has been changed again, altered again, and it's on mauve. So they need the mauve one.
Are they all in agreement now?
Yeah, I think so.
Well,
I think so. And Councillor Rains's corrections, I've just highlighted and left on top of your minutes.
Yeah.
There's
Has
only
anybody else got those?
No, they're only minor to the transcript. So if you just say 2 minor changes to the transcript, and just read what's highlighted, and we'll change them. She says famous last words. Famous. I know. Yeah. Yeah, we've read. How are we doing time-wise?
Just about a minute.
Okay. All rise, please, for the Chairman of the Council, Mandy Smith, Vice, and the Reverend Matt Finch of St Ives Methodist Church.
Thank you. Some of you will have had the honour of going to Christmas performances this year, the wonder of those eyes of children hearing the story. But for me, I've seen a dinosaur in a manger, so my Christmas is complete. But for us, some of us perhaps believe the claims of Christmas, some of us respect the views of others. For some of us, prayer is important, for others, being deep in our thoughts is what is important. So whether you are full of faith this Christmas time or respect that of others, let us pray as we begin today. Gracious God, as we remember this season of Advent and Christmas, of fragile light shining in the darkness, of hope where there seemed none, embodied in a vulnerable child, of unlikely peace found in the face of adversity and upheaval, we celebrate love this day, seen first in the Christmas story, and love seen in the busyness of family and friends. We ask that all we serve would know love in a way that they can receive it. As we consider those for whom Christmas will be hard, when this season will underline loneliness and exclusion, we ask that people on the fringe of society would know inclusion and belonging. And in the business and tasks of this gathering, thank you for opinions both contrary to our own and in agreement with our worldview. We thank you for the pursuit of common good at the heart of each item to be considered, and the commitment of each person to the communities they represent. So in this moment of stillness before discussions begin, we seek wisdom that sees beyond the surface, clarity of mind that unlocks complicated decisions, and leadership that empowers all in this place and beyond its boundaries to find and realise their potential. Amen.
Thank you. Thank you. We can just change seats.
Switch.
We carry on with the agenda. Apologies, Michelle. Mrs. Rowe. And if there are any others, please do say if they're not read out.
Chairman, I've received apologies from councillors Topping, Bailey, Hudson, Maguire and Harford.
I think there's a few more. Councillor Adey, I seem to see him and he said he wasn't going to be about. Are there any others? Councillor van der Ven will be late, but she has kindly notified us about. Are we all there? Okay. Right, if I can now move to the minutes of the 17th of October, I do have a couple of minor alterations which are within the response from Councillor Rains, in the response to the question to Mr Anthony Carpen. They're two minor ones, so I will read them out. Basically, that they were demolished to make way for the castle under William the Conqueror. That is one amendment. And including the best future use of this site. That's the other amendment. Can I ask if members are happy to agree the minutes with those two slight amendments? Agreed? And can I also ask that this response is also sent out to Mr Carpen? Right, I will sign these. There you go. Thank you. Right, Chairman's announcements. I do have a few announcements that I would like to make. Firstly, I would like to welcome members of the public to this meeting of the Council. You are very welcome, and I hope that you find this meeting of interest. The Council supports the principle of transparency and encourages filming, recording, and taking photographs at its meetings that are open to the public. Members are advised that this meeting may therefore be filmed, recorded or photographed. This meeting is being live streamed to the web and the County Council's YouTube channel. I would like to highlight this to members of the public that they may be filmed as part of this meeting and that this will appear on the web. Please can I ask all members and members of the public to turn their mobile phones to silent or vibrate whilst the meeting is taking place. It is with regret that I would like to report the recent death of former County Councillor Raymond Wilkinson, who represented Huntingdon North Division on behalf of the Conservatives from 1997 to 2005. During his time on the Council, Councillor Wilkinson was Chairman of the Education, Libraries and Heritage Committee and later the Cabinet Member for the Education, Libraries and Heritage and lead member for Schools and Pupil Attainment and School Organisation. The Council's thoughts are with his family and friends at this very sad time. Members, can I ask you please to stand for a few moments for Councillor Raymond Wilkinson. Thank you, members. Members, I will wish to note that Jonathan Lewis has been appointed the new Shared Service Director for Education. The outgoing Director of Learning, Keith Grimwade, retires at the end of the year. I am sure the Council will wish to welcome Jonathan and thank Keith for his contribution to the Council and wish him a long and happy retirement. Members will wish to note that over the next 5 years, the Council will be working with 25, making every adult matter, approach areas rising to 40 by the end of the programme, and the 12 local areas that are part of the Big Lottery Funds Fulfilling Lives, supporting people with multiple needs programme. By combining our evidence, knowledge and expertise together, we can ensure that everyone experiencing multiple needs across England reaches their full potential and contributes to their communities. Finally, there will be carol singing for employees and members at lunchtime starting at 1:30 in the foyer out here and finishing at 2 p.m. There will also be a bucket going around to raise funds for the Chairman's charity, which is the British Legion. That does conclude the announcements for today. We now move to back to the agenda. Can I please have any declarations of interest? There being none, we move on to number 4, public question time. Can I ask, right, go back to my, item 4 is the public question time, which allows members of the public to ask questions at the council meeting, provided that they have given advance notice. The council has received notice of 1 question, the content of which has been circulated electronically to all members and published on the Council's website. Could I please ask Miss Nikki Shepherd to come forward and ask her question, please?
Thank you, Chair. My question is for Councillor Steve Count. As you may remember, I was here 8 weeks ago presenting our petition to save the children's centres from the cuts that were pushed through in this council. The Conservative group made it very clear that this was not a cut to frontline services, but actually an increase of 7% of the budget for hard-to-reach families. The Liberal Democrat group has since spotted, and I believe has now been acknowledged, that the figure is actually only 3% of the budget, and I would first like to challenge the Council's whole financial justification for these cuts. The latest social mobility report shows that Cambridge as a city makes the 18th worst provision in the whole country for under 5s. This is why so many people across the county signed this petition. Also today, the Local Government Association has released damaging figures showing that 500 child protection investigations are started every day across the country, and a staggering 250% increase in the number of children being taken into care. That is actually 90 children entering the care system every day. These are exactly the children and families that the children's centres are there to protect, and these cuts are going to mean that they are not helped. I've also heard from many of our children's centres where frontline employees have been put under risk of redundancy. Managers don't know how they will finish out the academic year, both at the children's centres and at some of these nursery schools on the same sites. And this is without mentioning the numerous charities that depend on the children's centres and have not yet had time to find funding to fill the gaps. Until your group can evidence that your budget savings actually put extra funding into the families who are worse off, and that these cuts will not further damage the lives of under 5s in Cambridgeshire, nor will they affect any frontline services, would the Leader of the Council please call a halt to any further damaging changes whilst the details of the plan are finalised, open to public scrutiny so that people can plan accordingly. Thank you. Thanks. Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. I've got quite a simple answer to the question that's in front of me, and I do appreciate that you are introducing other elements to it that I wasn't aware of, that I certainly am not prepared for today. So in terms of the frontline delivery, we have committed to retaining all frontline delivery, including a broader and increased outreach offered to communities. The savings will be made from the back office functions, such as management and buildings. Thank you.
As a supplement, I would like to ask that these plans are published in full to the public. There are a number of parents and community members and people who depend on it, and as yet it all seems to be happening behind closed doors, and people are really, really worried about their jobs and services. So can you please publish these plans in full to the public?
Thank you. We now move on to item 5, petitions. Item 5 is on petitions and allows members of the public to present petitions in accordance with the agreed protocol. No petitions were received, so we move on to the next item. Before I proceed with the agenda, can I remind you about the audio and voting system? In order to register to speak, you need to press the silver button. You will then be automatically added to my list of speakers. If you have a point of order, this means that there has been an alleged breach of the council rules of procedure or law, so I will need the member to indicate the rule or law which he or she considers has been broken, or personal explanation. This may only relate to some material part of an earlier speech by the member, which may appear to have been misunderstood in the present debate. You need to raise your hand. Do not press the button. Okay, so we had no petitions. We now move on to the item for number 6 on the agenda, item for determination from General Purposes Committee, Treasury Management Report, Quarter 2. The item relates to the Treasury Management Report, Quarter 2, which was discussed by General Purposes Committee on the 28th November 2017. Can I ask the Chairman of the General Purposes Committee, Councillor Count, to move the recommendation as set out on the Council agenda? Do I have a seconder?
Madam Chairman, I so second, reserve my right to speak.
Is there any debate on this item? Oh, sorry. Would you like to present it first, Councillor? Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself.
Madam Chairman, before I do, I think you're stacked into the running order. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairman. Treasury Management Report, Quarter 2, 2017. We should all be used to the format of these now, so I don't intend to keep you too long. Some highlights. The cash continues to return favourably compared to the benchmark. There's a £350,000 underspend prediction at the end of the year. Net debt is predicted to be 21 million less than originally estimated at the point of March 2018. And I think that the one change that we've noticed in the outside world that is now a fact rather than some of the predictions contained is there was a change in interest rates from the Bank of England. In 5.4, if you study that, it describes the impact of the interest rate changes on our loans as extremely low. So I'll leave it open to questions. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Like Councillor Count, I'm very reassured to see that our investment returns are ahead of the benchmark, and I could perhaps ask for someone to give me some personal advice as to how I might achieve that in my domestic situation. Secondly, I note, as you've again referred to, that we've had the rise in interest rates that were forecast in September, as shown in the chart on 7.2, were scheduled for June 19, and they actually have already happened. and this may give us pause for thought next time we have an economist assuring us that they know what way the future lies. Although we're nowhere near breaching prudential borrowing limits, am I correct in believing that should we bump up against that limit, that we could actually modify them? And finally, looking at the document, we're given lots and lots of information about what we've borrowed, how much we have to pay back when, what the interest rate is, where we've got it, and so on. What I don't actually see in this document is a statement of what the cost is of extra borrowing. And as I understand it, it's a mixture of MRP and interest rates. And I'd be very grateful if future reports could include that information. I think cost is relevant, that we ought to know it. And secondly, the answer to what an extra £100 million would cost us if we borrowed it in terms of revenue. Thank you.
There are no other speakers, so I'm just going to give a chance to other speakers. So Councillor Count.
Did that make sense?
There are no other speakers. So Councillor Count, would you like to answer questions? Councillor Hickford, you have reserved your right. Would you like to speak? Sorry?
I think Councillor Cat will come back on Councillor Shellings. I just want to say to Councillor Shellings that with regard to economists, for 7 years, both within the council as a pension fund, as independent financial advisor, I have been arguing with economists who kept saying that an interest rate rise was imminent since 2010, and no way could we keep them that low. And so beware economists, I agree.
Councillor Count.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just to echo the exact same words that Roger has spoken, I think many of those that knew when I was back on the Pensions Committee, and every time the economists came in and said exactly what Roger's saying, yes, rates can't stay this low, they're about to change, I said, no, you've got that wrong. And for since 2011 to now, 7 years I've been proved right, and finally, I've been proved wrong because I'm still predicting, alongside the economist in here, that it'll probably be 2019, and I've got it wrong. But that's the nature of economic predictions, is you do have a smorgasbord of predictions out there. We tend to publish in our paperwork, both the Treasury Management, the pension thing, the central predictions, and a fan-like type graph of where the outliers might be. But generally speaking, more of them will get it wrong than right. But is it close enough to make assumptions on? Our paperwork is based on assumptions, and that will go up or down based on how that plays out with reality. In terms of prudential borrowing, as you say, you're quite right to say that there is a significant headroom between our prudential borrowing figures and our actual borrowing figures. There are two figures that I think we should highlight. There is the one is what we as a council agree is our borrowing figure for the coming year. And that is agreed by council once a year, and that is up to us to change. There's also a figure that government stipulates as being more rational, not rational, being more steadfast, I understand. And we couldn't change anything, we could not change anything that was set on us by government. We can only change our internal decision making on that. There is nothing I foresee in the future at the moment that will lead us to bump up against the prudential borrowing figure should we get there. If we do get there, it will be a matter for full council to decide what to do about that. The cost of extra borrowing, it's a difficult question to answer, but it's a good question. And the reason it's difficult to answer is at any point in time, depending on where you're going to borrow from and the rates that are set at that point in time, will change the figures of the impact of that decision. Now, I do take your point that how do we as a council make good decisions about how much extra we can borrow if we don't know the true cost of the borrowing. So what I suggest is certainly, definitely for full council, that should there be any extra capital borrowing requirement, or the net effect, shall we say, of the change in the capital borrowing requirement, that we try and put some figure alongside that, what the cost on the revenue account is, both MRP and interest separated out. And I think that's a good thing to do. But then again, until the actual day we borrow it, that can only ever be an estimate, because those figures may change depending on what we borrow at that point in time. It should note that this council is very good at internal borrowing. Around the 200, I haven't gone back into the details of the report, but in the region of 200 million odd internal borrowing. So borrowing that we've got that we are entitled to borrow elsewhere, but because we have a positive cash flow, we actually don't utilise that way. So thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Next is item 7. I propose to move as chairman the recommendation as set out in the tabled report to come into effect from January the 1st, 2018. In the absence of Councillor Maguire, can I ask Councillor Count as the leader of the council to second, please?
Yes, seconded, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Can I ask if there is any debate on this item? Is everybody happy to accept it? Accepted. We next move on to item number 8, motions submitted under Council Procedure Rule 10. 4 motions have been submitted. The first motion has been submitted by Councillor Downs. Can I please ask Councillor Downs to move and speak to his motion as set out on page 2 of the Council agenda?
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. You have the motion before you, and I'd like to propose that motion, and I think I might have a seconder.
Let's get a seconder, please. Councillor Bowden. Hang on, sorry. Have I said something? That's Councillor Downs. Would you like to put your motion forward? Would you like to speak further to it?
Yes, if you wish. Yes,
yes, that's fine.
This motion starts, perhaps rather surprisingly, by me congratulating the Conservative government on its decision. I'm very pleased that they have introduced a national funding formula. It's taken a long time to arrive. It was proposed many, many years ago, and the first person to reject it was John Major in 1995, when he said that the proposal was far too clear and a little obfuscation assists the political process, a phrase which has stuck with me for many years. In 2002, the next attempt for a national formula was rejected by David Miliband, and he admitted that it was a mistake to have rejected it, but he did reject it. The next opportunity was Michael Gove in 2010-11. He said he wanted a simple, fair formula, but in fact did nothing about it. It was only towards the end of the coalition government in 2014 that the then Minister for Schools agreed in principle that this should happen, but there was not time to implement it before the Conservatives lost the support of the Liberal Democrats in the 2015 election. Nevertheless, it has been implemented, and so that is good news. The more recently elected members may not realise that Cambridgeshire has had a very significant part to play in this process. It was Cambridgeshire, with a joint proposal by Liberal John Brackenbury and Conservative Robert James, which devised a scheme for local financial management a long time ago, and that was influential in the format of the Education Reform Act in 1988. In addition to that, we were the first local authority to actually devise a way of analysing and costing the school's curriculum. We called it activity-led and needs-led funding. So we can claim a positive contribution to this whole area. So why now is there widespread dissatisfaction? Why are people marching on Parliament and waving banners? The fair funding formula announcement raised expectations which have not been met because the total amount allocated to schools is inadequate. Schools are gradually falling behind as costs rise, and although per pupil amounts stay the same, the actual effect on schools is a reduction in purchasing value of about 5%. Now, that is not just my personal opinion, that is confirmed by the National Audit Office, and if you've read the briefing note, you'll see that that is absolutely clear, that is confirmed. Now, there has been an additional allocation, and it is 1.3 billion over 2 years. The government is now cleverly using the idea of several years to make it sound a large number. We had this, remember, with the mayoral devolution proposal of 600 million over 30 years. But it's less than $1 billion a year, and it is inadequate. And that is the point of my motion, that we want to add our voice to the many, many voices across the country, including from many Conservative councils, that the quantum must be increased. Because if we fail to invest adequately in the education of young people, we are doing them a disservice, and we are doing the country a disservice as well. So I would urge you to add the Cambridgeshire voice to the national clamour for funding for schools, which will enable them to provide the broad and balanced curriculum that we are going to need if we're going to prepare our young people for a more demanding and more rapidly changing world than any of us ever knew. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Downs. Can I ask for a sec? I understand now there is an amendment. Councillor Bowden.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I will be brief, or at least I'll be as brief as I'm able to be. I would like, rather surprisingly maybe, to congratulate Councillor Downs on putting this motion forward. It must be the spirit of Christmas. I very much welcome the fact that this has been brought forward because it is an important subject. And who among us would not wish to see more funding for our schools here in Cambridgeshire? One would hope that on that point at least we would have cross-party support throughout this chamber. However, I do have some concerns about this motion in that, first of all, there is an unresolved inherent contradiction within it, and secondly, there is some political reality that we must face. The unresolved inherent contradiction is in paragraphs 2 and 3 of the motion, which I'm not proposing to change because both paragraphs are entirely correct. The first being that the formula will begin to address the issue of inequity in school funding, and that it fails to do so fully, and that is just a matter of fact. And the second is that we welcome that the government has been able to find, in these very difficult economic times, has been able to find an additional £1.3 billion over 2 years. Both of those statements are matters of fact, both of them are correct, but there is a contradiction within them. And the contradiction is that the more funding which is found on a national basis for education, the greater, unless there are other changes, the greater the inequity there will be, and the more that we will lose out in proportionate in cash terms compared with those local authorities which are benefiting from the current system. Now, Councillor Downs made the point about how important education spending is on a national basis, and I don't think any of us can disagree with that. For a whole host of reasons, the more money that we are as a country able to invest in education, and it's one of those rare cases where government spending really is investment in the future, the more we're able to do, the better it will be for the country as a whole. But as far as this council is concerned, and as far as this county is concerned, the really important thing for us to do now is to ensure that we do get closer to the fairer spending formula that we've been pushing for, and that will produce a greater amount of cash advantage for schools in this local authority than a proportionate increase in the quantum of spending overall. It's absolutely essential that we do find a way of pushing the government, encouraging the government to look again at the funding formula so that the next time that it comes up, we do manage to get the equitable settlement that we're seeking. And the political reality, and an economic reality, which hasn't been addressed within this motion, Chairman, is the fact that we are in straitened economic times. The very fact that 1.3 billion extra has been found is very welcome. The idea, however, that we can just push for more and more spending on education is politically probably unrealistic at this time. So if we wish to maintain some cross-party consensus within this council chamber, and I hope we do, Madam Chairman, then I think it does help for us to concentrate not on the national political and economic situation as far as funding is concerned, but our local requirements. And the best way for us to move that forward is for us to argue that we continue the pressure on central government to get this fairer funding formula that we've argued for so long. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Can I ask if you have a seconder? Thank you. Councillor Downs, do you accept the amendment?
No, I do not accept the amendment, and I will explain why when we get to discuss it, if it is adopted.
Okay, members, we are now going to debate the amendment as proposed by Councillor Bowden and seconded by Councillor Bywater. We are debating the amendment only.
I seem to be the only one. Oh, no.
Councillor Netsing.
Thank you. I'm deeply disappointed that the members opposite have chosen to amend this motion rather than supporting it. Cambridgeshire schools have been underfunded in comparison with schools nationally for many, many years, and we have been promised by Conservative councillors and MPs that the new national funding formula would improve this situation. But now that the formula has been introduced, it is apparent that many schools are not going to have any increase in their funding at all, and some of them will see a reduction. This situation is as a result of the government's decision not to increase funding with all schools to keep in line with rising pupil numbers and inflation. As we face a major skills crisis in this country, with fewer skilled workers choosing to work in the UK as a result of Brexit, investing in education is more important than ever. Conservative councillors have until now been keen to say that our schools are underfunded and to press for more funding. And I am now disappointed that they now seem unwilling to put pressure on the government to ensure that our schools are properly funded. I was hearing yesterday from a teacher who is having to buy her class pencils because the school has run out. She's having to fund their pencils out of her own pocket because their school's budget is overspent and there is no more money to buy pencils for her class. There is a massive problem in recruiting teachers in this country and in this county. But situations like that make doing the job almost impossible. We have to provide our teachers and our schools with the funding that they need to educate our children properly. Councillor Bowden has focused on the need to change the formula, but what that effectively means is taking money away from other children in other parts of the country in order to make better funding for Cambridgeshire schools. What we actually need is more funding for all of our schools because we have more children in our schools. He says we are in economically straitened times, yet the government seems to have plenty of money to fund Brexit studies and paying off the DUP. It is a disgrace that councillors opposite are not willing to support this as a request to government to fund our schools properly. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Crawford.
I only wanted to briefly pick up on one or two points that Councillor Bowden made. And that is that we're living in difficult economic times. Now, our difficult economic times and the deficit and how we deal with the deficit is a political choice. I mean, only just recently in the news, the government has actually given a 4.75 billion bank levy cut to the banks. Now, I think our schools are more important than the banks. That we should be asking for fairer funding and an increase in funding for our schools together. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor White.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I too wish to oppose this amendment because we are asking that all schools should be properly funded because there is currently underfunding for all. And I would just draw attention to the fact that we don't even need to ask the Chancellor to put more money into the system. All we have to do is to ask the Secretary of State for Education to use her budget much more wisely. We had a moment of hope recently when Lord Nash announced that they were not going to fund free schools unless there was a need for a free school or there were some exceptional circumstances. A statement which most of us rejoiced about, because up till that point, the idea was that they would open free schools even in areas where they were not needed. And we have two examples of that in Cambridgeshire, one as a proposal for a free school in St Neots, where a new secondary school is not needed. There are plenty of places, and similarly in Godmanchester. Unfortunately, Lord Nash, after making that statement, appears to have disappeared from the Department of Education and was replaced by somebody else, and it appears that that policy is back on track. That, and I know that there are members over there who agree, is a total waste of taxpayers' money. Building schools where you've got to buy the site, you've got to put up the buildings, you've got to support that school, where there is not a need for a school on demographic variables, is a colossal waste of taxpayers' money. And if the Secretary of State for Education, if she would simply recognise that that is a pointless waste of money, then there would be more money overall for the cake that is called education. So I strongly oppose the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair. First, I need to register an interest, declare an interest. I'm a trustee of the Morris Education Trust, which is responsible for IVC and Wychford Village College. And I started today at 7:30 at a trustees board meeting of IVC. So if I nod up while I'm speaking, you'll understand why. Councillor Bowden is forensic as ever, but maybe a bit confused. There is no incompatibility between paragraphs 2 and 3. They address different issues. And he forgets the adage about all ships rising with a tide. He also talks about national reality. And I think Councillor Crawford summed up the falseness of that position quite well. The national reality is driven by the Conservative Party. That's fine, they are in government. He is asking me to support that government, which I do not. There are lots of other national policies which would find the money to invest in more education. But taking out taking out paragraph 4 with items A to B, A to D is wrong, because those are reality. We were talking about them this morning. Schools have increasing IT costs, increasing pension costs, increasing building costs. And what I tend to call product mix has changed. It is a lot more difficult to teach the heterogeneous population of pupils today than it was in the past. That adds extra complexity and cost to running a school. You cannot ignore this. And Councillor Bowden has effectively taken a motion about raising overall cost, overall investment in school. He's changed that motion into one about fairer funding. They're different motions. He's changed the motion. And I don't think he should have done that. Had he wished to have said we should also vote on fair funding as well, I would have been sympathetic. But no, he's taken out the fact. As he says, we need to invest more money in our kids. But he's taken out the call to action to ask for that extra money to be spent on our kids. This is an unnecessary, it's a wrong motion. I will oppose it.
Thank you. Councillor Richards.
Thank you. I'm also very disappointed by the amendments. I'd like to pick up on the narrowing of the curriculum. I'm very concerned that subjects like art history, classics, expressive arts are actually at risk. I was in a local secondary school and the teachers were talking about the impact of cutting back on expressive arts, creative arts on young people. Our young people are showing an increase in mental health issues, and teachers were talking about the benefit of those kinds of subjects, and we should be looking after the health and well-being of our children, and that's all part of their education. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Chair. This proposed amendment is so shocking that one might be struck speechless. I am pleased to say that rather it propels me into speech. Having to reduce the number of teachers, the National Education Union makes it clear that teachers are already under huge strain, and taking this out fails to recognise that every teacher has a right to work in circumstances that are not health denying and that are not ill health producing. And that is what this current regime is doing to teachers. I echo the words of my colleague, Councillor Richards, in relation to narrowing the curriculum offer and simply add this: languages are under threat too. Now, this indicates how hopeless the current government is in terms of even on another level being able to deal with Brexit, because languages are absolutely crucial to trade, they're crucial to business, and they're crucial to the creative industries that add such a surplus to the budget. Spanish and French are also essential if one wants to work for the UN agencies, if one wants to work in the ICC, the International Criminal Court, or if one wants to work in the ILO, the International Labour Organisation. These are all huge opportunities for our people, for our children, for our adults, for our students, and they are simply being cut off and denied. And I return to the creative industries. 89 billion is added to the GDP by the creative industries in this country. The Labour manifesto makes this clear and applauds the creative industries, and yet what this government is doing is seeking to destroy them and to actually negate that 89 billion that we actually at the present time gain from the creative industries. In terms of the finding it difficult to provide equipment and materials, Councillor Down has actually been very mild in saying that, because as Councillor Singer has pointed out, teachers and parents are having to actually produce pencils and pens so that children can learn. And I say this, it's absolutely clear that whenever a Conservative government comes into power, they seek to destroy the education system, because they know that knowledge is power, and they know that enabling children who come from the working class, who come from disadvantaged areas, to actually go into an education system that's a fair one and that provides the opportunity for those children, they know that actually changes power relationships, and they want to deny that. I conclude simply by saying this: every child has a right to a decent education, and it's being denied by the policies of this government. Every parent has a right to have its child in a school that can provide a decent education, and that is being denied by this government. And every teacher has a right to teach in a school where that teacher can actually provide proper instruction to children, and those issues are absolutely vital, and they're being denied by Councillor Bowden in this proposed amendment. We speak against it.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. Councillor Tierney.
Thank you, Chairman. Always a little uncomfortable at motions that seek to instruct the government on what it should do. I'm aware that the monitoring officer says that these are appropriate and we can discuss them, but it always makes me a little uncomfortable, because I worry that it makes us sound like frustrated, failed parliamentarians. The last that I saw, this is the county council offices, it's not the Houses of Parliament. And so I'm always more keen to see us focus on local business that is within our remit. Now, Councillor Jenkins said that Councillor Bowden's motion sought to change the original motion, so his amendment. I don't agree with that. I think it sought to refocus it, and I think it sought to do so correctly, because instead of looking at instructing the government, which is outside of our remit, he sought to move it to talking about the actual issues that affect the people of Cambridgeshire, which is actually what we're here for, which is why I will be supporting the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Giles.
Thank you, Chairman. I looked at the original motion from Councillor Downs and I thought, oh, this is all jolly good stuff. At long last, we're getting some quite a lot of money from the government. I don't think it's going to cost our local taxpayers anything. It can only be good, wholesome investment in our young children. I heard Councillor Bowden's amendment, and I looked at it, and I've been waiting to hear why Councillor Bowden is actually saying this, because what he's deleting is that he's saying, in effect, by deleting the fact that the increase is not sufficient to compensate, he's saying that this 1.3 million or billion pound is sufficient. And that's what I find very confusing. If it is sufficient, then fine, let's put it, let's accept it. But I don't believe it is sufficient. And we've heard members say that they don't think it's sufficient. I personally, from my experience in the ward I represent, or division I represent, know that it's not sufficient. I don't think. I don't normally work in billions. But I've yet to hear an argument to say, yes, it's enough. But until I do, I shall be voting against that amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harrison.
Thanks very much, Chair. I won't be supporting the amendment, and it's because of the lack of ambition that it shows. In the old days of feisty, independent, ambitious local education authorities in this country, of which this authority was absolutely, definitely one, this amendment would never have been put. There would have been a longing and a clear ambition to champion our community's actual needs and not to kowtow to central government. And this is what this amendment is doing, is to say, and I think actually in a way the key word for me is realistic in the penultimate paragraph, the realistic opportunity. This is about councillors, Conservative councillors, who appear to believe that they are one and the same as government ministers. You're not. We all have to stand up here and champion our local communities. And it's quite clear that there isn't enough money in the education system, and we should be fighting for that and not emasculating motions that are designed to try to achieve it.
Thank you, Councillor Harrison. Councillor Rains, before I ask you to speak, can I say nobody else has indicated to speak? I will ask. So then I will be asking Councillor Downs to sum up, if you like, on the amendment. Sorry, Councillor Rains.
Thank you very much. I wanted to support Councillor Bowden's amendment for a number of reasons, but first of all, actually I just wanted to pick out from the amendment the language about cross-party consensus. And I just wanted to emphasise that there are a lot of things that have been said by opposition members that I wholeheartedly agree with, in particular about the range of the curriculum, about the importance of subjects like classics and arts. I think one of the things that's wrong with our education system today is that you can go a very long way by being able to quote Latin, and that sort of suggests some kind of elitism. That's something that should be accessible to all students right across the board. So I very much echo what's been said on that side of the chamber about inclusion, and that's what education, what publicly funded education is all about. But what we're talking about today, and the reason why I think Councillor Bowden is right with his amendment, is how to ensure more funding for schools in Cambridgeshire. And we want to make a difference, we want to get a result, and in order to do that I think you do need to focus, and focusing on fairer funding on the formula is the right thing to do. I want to pay tribute to the work that Councillor Count has done in promoting the whole argument for fairer funding for this county over the last few months. And to our members of Parliament. Lobbying by our members of Parliament is responsible for the progress that has been made on the fairer funding formula for schools. But when you look at where we are on that fairer funding formula, some of us received a hugely illuminating presentation from officers last Friday. The differential left in the system by the current proposals for a fairer funding formula is still huge. If I, just from memory, I think the best funded schools are getting £5,700 or thereabouts per pupil. We are getting, it's 3,600, something like that. The differential of getting on for a half between the best funded and the worst funded, and the way the formula is framed is it still rewards historic educational underperformance and other things that actually will keep money going to the areas that have already got money. So I think to make a difference, we do need to focus on the thing we can influence and change to get more money into Cambridgeshire schools, and that is the fairer funding formula itself. And so that's why I think the amendment is right in drawing this into something slightly narrower.
Thank you, Councillor Rains. Can I ask Councillor Downs to sum up on the amendment, please? Nobody else has said.
Yes, thank you. Thank you to those who have spoken. I'm in a very difficult position, frankly, because this topic has been my professional focus since 1993. And I have worked on many, many working parties and negotiated with ministers at various levels. And so what I was presenting was the fruit, if you like, of the experience, of the problems, of the detail of a formula. Now, why was it necessary in the first place for Cambridgeshire to get stroppy about the formula? That's the basic question. And the reason was that in prehistoric times, long before Josh Schumann got out of short trousers, funding for schools was decided by the local council. Okay? And that was the baseline. Now, it so happens that there was a council of a particular political colour in Cambridgeshire which thought that the best thing to do was to keep funding as low as possible because the council taxpayers had to pay for it. And that is why we were low. It was a political decision. Now, that became significant in 1992-3 because schools were being judged by Ofsted on national criteria but being funded on a basis of local decision-making. And that is why it was unfair, and that is why the national campaign for fair funding started. And it's not just Cambridgeshire, it was a whole host of others as well. That is the point of the whole exercise. Now, as I explained in my previous remarks, we've gone some way. It's not working at the moment, it is still unfair because the quantum is inadequate. When you introduce a new system which produces winners and losers, you've got to build in caps so that the losers don't lose too much. And in order to do that, you've got to take the money from the winners at the bottom. And that is the fundamental problem as to why the scheme is still unfair. So if there were more money in it, it would be fairer. And Cambridgeshire would benefit from it. Now, people have talked about the numbers, and let's be quite clear. We are not talking about equality of number. That's completely misleading because we recognise, and the formula demonstrates, that children in other parts of the country need more money than Cambridgeshire children because they have greater needs or the costs of the schools are greater. And these factors are now exposed to public scrutiny in a formula, so we can now talk about the formula. I don't actually agree with all the detail items within the formula, but I'm delighted that there is a formula which enables to talk about it intelligently and constructively. Now, the point of this motion was not just to plead for Cambridgeshire, but to enable the system to be fairer, from which Cambridgeshire would benefit. That is the purpose of the motion, of my original motion, and what Councillor Bowden has proposed wrecks it, and it is based on too many fallacies, and I just think it would be inappropriate for the Council to adopt it.
Thank you, Councillor Downs. We have debated the amendment. We will now move to the vote on the amendment. Mrs Rowe, can you take us through the voting, please? If anybody is not clear, then just raise your hand and we're happy to ask some questions, but we are voting on the amendment.
Would members please press the blue button to indicate they are present? Members in favour of the amendment, please press the green button marked plus. Members against the amendment, please press the red button marked minus. Members wishing to abstain, please press the yellow button marked with a cross. Chairman, I'm now closing the vote. The result of the vote is 31 votes in favour, 22 against and no abstentions. The amendment is therefore carried.
Thank you very much. We now move to debate the substantive motion, which is the... Can I ask I now ask that we move to debate the substantive motion, please? As amended by our previous vote.
Sorry.
I have one speaker, Councillor Downs. Then if members are happy, we have debated them. Councillor Downs.
I propose we move to the vote because it's a pointless amendment. It adds nothing. It makes it look rather silly. And so I don't propose to waste council's time talking about it. So I propose that the motion now be put.
Can I ask if that's seconded? I would imagine that is second. Unless there are any objections, we are going to move to the vote on the substantive motion. As amended by
Let's go with it. He doesn't. Not if we've gone to the vote.
Hang on. Sorry, I told my leader first. Not in the debate. The right to speak in the debate will not sum up. We have already decided that we're going to move to the vote. So let's move to the vote.
It's fine. It's fine. Let's see what happens this time.
Please press the blue button to indicate they are present. Members in favour of the motion, please press the blue button. Members against the substantive motion, please press the yellow button.
Come on, what's going on here? What the fuck is going on? Where's our vote? Madam Chairman. That's it. If I may, Madam Chairman, I think at a previous council meeting we found it totally inappropriate that people who were present decided just to not be part of the voting system. I strongly urge everybody who is present that you should actually decide whether to vote yes, no or abstain. It is not good council behaviour to sit there and not press your buttons. That's better. Fucking hell. I think they got a bit confused here. Tim's voted. That's the old vote.
Thank you. That concludes discussion of the first motion. We now move to the second motion submitted by Councillor Sanderson. Before I ask Councillor Sanderson to move this motion, I understand... Is there an alteration? I understand that there is an alteration which has been circulated to all members. Can I ask for the meeting's consent, which will be signified without discussion? Do you accept the alteration that's been circulated to you all? Can I ask Councillor Sanderson to move and speak to his motion as set out in the sheet circulated to all members? And can I ask if you have a seconder?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I have a seconder. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I wanted to bring this motion to the Council today, excuse me, because street lighting is one of those subjects that seems to affect almost everybody in our county. We've all had representations about it, and I have to say they've not been particularly positive in many cases, certainly not in my case. It was clear to me even before I was made of the deductions for substandard performance under the PFI contract that the system hadn't been working as it should and it hadn't been keeping our communities safe. We all saw the problems throughout the county when columns were removed completely, often for no logical reason whatsoever, and where they were replaced, the inordinate amount of time it took with hundreds of barriers covering empty holes for months at a time and various other issues. So there is around a £384,000 underspend in the street lighting budget this year due to these deductions. This was confirmed in the last report to the Highways, Communities and Infrastructure Committee. And the reasons for the deductions are ones we can all relate to: lighting performance levels being below the contract standard, issues relating to cleaning, excessive repair time, inspections not being carried out, and changes of lanterns not being done in a timely fashion. I do recognise and appreciate the work of our officers and what they've done to monitor and enforce the terms of the contract to get us to a better position. And I recognise there are other budgetary pressures in the ETE Directorate, and this sum may be used to offset some of those pressures, but I think we need to know a lot more about how this underspend will be used. I think we need to know that today. In my own town of Huntingdon, the town council there is spending some £6,000 to replace just 4 columns in the town that residents have come to us requesting are installed that were previously removed. And I'm afraid we do have a long time still left on the PFI contract. I've heard 19 years potentially, or 25 years, a very long time. And we could see this problem occur again. And I think we as a county council need to take some action now. We need to strengthen the streetlight service and at least use some of that deduction to undertake that task. We need to replace many of the columns that have been removed. We've created, I'm afraid, a lot of black holes and unsafe places in our neighbourhoods. And we also need to look to bring our existing infrastructure up to standard. There's actually been a recent business case carried out by the council which stated that some 2,700 columns need upgrading to LED standard in order to make them more energy efficient. The council appears to have accrued them since the contract started because apparently housing developers haven't brought them up to the required standard, even though this council has taken on ownership of them. This would actually cost the council £735,000 if we decided to upgrade all these columns, which I think begs the question why we allowed it to happen in the first place. So I'm not suggesting that we agree to replace all the columns that have been removed, but I think we should be at least looking to bring some of these lost areas back into service. It won't mean an increase in council tax for residents, and it won't necessarily mean a loss in funding for other areas, but it is an issue that affects almost everyone in Cambridgeshire. So let's have a cross-party group. Let's just have a working party. Let's have some influence, and let's look forward to potentially improving our service. Thank you.
All of a sudden.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to look at this, as Councillor Sanderson's just said, the people it affects are our residents. There are pockets of darkness in St Neots. These are on residential streets, which never did seem to be a problem before the upgrade. I have had residents add outside lights to their own house, just so they can see the area in front of their house to enable them to get to and from their house safely. I walk through certain streets in Amesbury. I actually struggle to see the curb. You know, it's very, very difficult to see the curb when I'm walking through. These are normal residential streets on estates. You know, we would expect to be able to walk safely on our streets. I do believe this is due to the decreased volume of lights in the area, and I will be voting for this motion.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Sorry, Councillor, point of order. I'm actually seconding the motion, but I'm reserving my right to speak.
Let's crack on. This is completely uncontrolled.
Councillor Wilson, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Many years ago, when this project originally came to one of the committees that I was sitting on, we were told that there was an opportunity to use government PFI credits to replace our street lighting network by more efficient and brighter lights. Now, that has simply not happened. In some areas, we've got reasonable lighting along main roads, but on estate roads, it is much, much darker than it used to be before. And that's why we're getting so many complaints, not just in Huntingdon, which is part of my division, but in other places as well. The overall network has reduced by 10%, and so that has given us some efficiencies in numbers of columns that have got to be maintained. But these columns are now in much more random locations, and that's why we've got these very dark spots. So I'm fully supportive of Councillor Saunderson's proposal that we use some of the money that has been saved this year to replace lights that have been removed in dark areas to improve safety for all. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Shooter.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, if I take you back to when this all started, we had a PFI contract. The government offered us 55 million to replace our ageing lighting stock. Most of the columns, as some of you will probably remember, across Cambridgeshire were the old concrete columns. They were in a very, very poor state, and the lighting failures that we were having were considerable. I think those of us who possibly weren't even councillors will remember lights being out on a regular basis right across the area that we live in. And the lighting was the old sodium lighting, which was very expensive and quite unreliable. Now, the PFI contract enabled us to replace virtually all our columns with the new metal columns and with the new tops, and to introduce a range of controls which can sometimes are local and sometimes are, I mean local, I mean by village, and sometimes are on a larger basis. I think it would be silly to claim that the Balfour Beatty contract went smoothly. I think we all had issues in our areas. I know I battled for a long time in Bottisham to get them to understand that Bottisham wasn't a super highway and didn't want 5-metre high columns down the high street of a traditional small village. Anyway, we did eventually get there, but there were many issues, and I think to an extent we're feeling the hangover of that, and we are feeling the response from our residents, which is to do with those frustrations. But they are now basically behind us. The reason for this windfall, which is effectively what it is, although it is part of the mechanism of £370,000, is because that was the process built into the contract to enable us to fine Balfour Beatty for inadequate performance. It is largely a one-off. I'm not saying there couldn't be some small windfalls in the future if the performance dips again, but the performance has increased dramatically. The number of light outages in 2014-15 was 7,688. The number in 2015-16 was 4,976, and the number in 2016-17 was 2,782. So you can see a dramatic reduction as time has gone on. The whole point of the contract, apart from renewing our stock of lights, was also to reduce the overall number of lights by 10% and to look to a more efficient form of lighting, which was done. The future of the contract is going to allow us to replace some of those lights which still don't have the intermediate lighting, which is much more efficient, i.e. the old sodium still or something in between with LED, and that is going ahead. So LED is gradually being introduced. The reason it wasn't introduced at the beginning was not because LED itself was unreliable, it was because the mechanism that surrounded LED was unreliable. Now that has improved dramatically. Originally when we looked at this, when the PFI was negotiated, the payback period on LED was 15 years. The payback period has now dropped to 7 years. So it is right where, where the replacements come up that we replace them with LED. So the contract is working, despite local frustrations, which I fully accept. It has produced a large improvement. The number of outages have dropped dramatically. There is further investment going in under the contract with LED and the more controllable system of lighting. So I therefore feel that a working group, which is, I mean, the amended motion is an improvement, quite clearly, and it does state a lot more of the facts of what's happened, but the final part of it, for a working group, I can't see will serve any realistic purpose. Members are fully entitled and do, on a regular basis, complain about local issues with this to Balfour Beatty or sometimes to me. And we try and get them sorted out in a timely manner. But there has been a major improvement in the function of the contract. That is continuing, and I would feel that having a working group would serve no useful purpose whatsoever. And also spending this money, which is the key point, on a budget which is very, very stretched anyway, on something specific that is being improved all the time, would not be the right thing to do. So therefore, I cannot support the amended motion.
Thank you. Councillor Jones. Hang on, we haven't got you on the microphone at the moment. You were there. Yeah. Press your button.
You don't press it.
Leave it on, it changes. Right. Okay. Right, okay. My colleague trying to get in first. Right, okay, there we are. I would support this motion. I think it's important that we have a group made up of people who understand these issues and who can represent not the anodyne words that I've heard from a colleague about the improved performance, but the reality of what citizens are having to face. I did go onto the Balfour Beatty site, which looked at its work for Cambridgeshire, and it talks about transforming Cambridgeshire street lighting to create a safer and more sustainable community. Well, I don't think it's doing that. It may make itself more sustainable, and I'm not sure it's making a safer and more sustainable community across Cambridgeshire. The other thing I would question is about whose money it is, because the 384k that has been the fine that's been imposed on Balfour Beatty, arguably some of that might go back, for example, to Cambridge City Council or to other districts that have put in extra brightness on these lights. And I checked with Cambridge City Council, and they are paying for a third extra brightness from 60 to 80% of full strength for all Cambridge residential streets. So our lights are brighter than they would otherwise have been. And part of the reason for that is because of the unreasonable reduction in the columns in some parts of the city. So I think part of the money might actually be owed to various councils.
Thank you. Councillor Kindersley.
Thank you, Chairman. I will make two very brief points. The first is that I, having suffered very substantially the communities that I represent over the last number of years of this contract, I was absolutely staggered that the amount of money of 384,000 was so little. I think it's probably 384,000 from the Gamlingay division alone that should have been taken from the contract. I can't even begin to describe the horrors that Councillor Sanderson slightly adverted to that my communities had suffered as a result of this contract. The second point is to reiterate what Councillor Jones has just said. Surely the equitable way of dealing with this money is that it be spent in and on the communities where the contract was being executed so abysmally badly that those communities, the suffering that they have undertaken, the lights that they have lost, the lady in the buggy who drove into a hole that had been left by the contractors, the list of disaster was endless. I know Councillor Taylor is nodding her head. I think Queen Edith suffered even worse, if that was possible. This money should, in fact, equitably be invested back into those communities who paid that price and, in many cases, continue to pay the price of this incredibly inadequate and poorly delivered contract.
Thank you. Councillor Braddon.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very quick point. I absolutely endorse what Councillor Jones and Councillor Kindersley have just said, and I question the member opposite's suggestion that this has all been, broadly speaking, hunky-dory. And I think the reason that the number of complaints has dropped is because residents have given up trying to say what is such a problem. Even in my own village, which has, fortunately for the village, a good spine road through, which is one of the roads that is better lit, the side roads are appalling. There are, in combination with the lack of a separate issue, sweeping of pavements and roads, with autumnal leaves coming down. Actually, there are some roads in my village which are extremely dangerous because they are now not only slippery, but also dark. And we have had to actually request directly from South Cambs that some roads be swept because it's so dangerous, because you can't see. So my feeling is this is the attrition of, trying to say this isn't right enough, and people simply giving up. So I heartily endorse this motion and the amendment.
Thank you. Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Chair. I begin by thanks. I thank Councillor Shooter for appreciating the improvements made to this motion by me. I thank Councillor Sanderson for accepting my changes to his motion, and also for his having originally invited me to second it. And I thank Councillor Smith for bringing to my to my attention that, albeit I believed I was the putative seconder of this motion, I am not. So I stand here as a renounced seconder of a motion, and I speak. This problem of lack of lighting in the streets is a continuing one. And although I have noted in Councillor Sanderson's motion that we appreciate the robust approach of the officers in seeking to ensure that Balfour Beatty actually lives up to its task, first, will we have the benefit of these robust councillor officers in the future over the period, the long period, continuing period of this contract, to ensure that that robustness of bringing to Balfour Beatty's attention the fact that they're not performing effectively will continue. Secondly, it is of course good that the officers are robust in their approach, but that does not mean that we as councillors ought not to be robust in our approach too. And thus, we of course are supporting Councillor Sanderson's motion, seconded as it now is by Councillor Taylor. We also I draw attention to the fact that in my arbory, there's one, just as an example, there's one street, Metcalfe Road, where there's a light over there, and about 100 yards up the street, there's another one. And what under this contract is supposed to be happening is that the penumbra from this light is supposed to meet up with the penumbra from that light, and they will meet in the middle. Well, in fact, in the middle is a large, black, dark hole. And in the middle, if one does not carry a torch, one cannot see where, it's not just where one's feet are going, it's one's feet at all. And this is not a remote situation, and it happens in the villages too. And we deplore the fact that we are not even going to be allowed on the officer's briefing note to use this 300,000 odd to actually endeavour to improve the situation in some small measure. And I come to my last point there. We are being told in this briefing note, I see, if I can find the briefing note, that this money has to be retained to ensure the overall balance of the ETE budget. Well, does that mean that the officers are making a determination that this 300,000 odd is going to be retained to improve the budget of the ETE? I'm afraid that the officers need to know that we do have some power in this council, and it's up to the members of that committee to make the determination, not to the officers in a briefing note. I conclude on this note. We should not be in darkness. The residents should not be in darkness. The safety of residents should not be at risk. And the safety is at risk for pedestrians, for cyclists, for the elderly. In the lighting situation I referred to, there are shops across the road and there are people wanting to get to the shops. What if you've run out of milk in the night time? You don't always go and do your shopping in the morning. What if you've run out of some urgent nappy need for your child, your baby? You can't get to the shops because you can't see where your feet are going in order to get there. So I conclude by saying, of course, we're supporting this motion. And you on the other side, if any one of you was like there used to be members of the Conservative Party who actually cared about human beings other than themselves, if any one of you fitted into that category of Conservative, you'd be supporting this motion.
Thank you. Councillor Giles. Councillor Tidd.
I'm sorry, Chairman. Can I just clarify who's seconding the motion, because I'm not sure.
Councillor Giles, please carry on.
Normally the seconder, Chairman. Normally the seconder reserves the right to speak, and I think I did hear that you did do that, didn't you? Yes, yes. Right, thank you, Chairman. My experience of Balfour Beatty recently has been pretty good. Yep, I will say that, because when I've reported lights out, they've been reinstalled. Hallelujah, many hands make light work, and I don't have any problems with Balfour Beatty. I don't have any problems with this motion, and I think the crux of this motion is the final paragraph, which apparently the Conservatives are not going to support, which is a shame. It really is a shame. Yeah, Balfour Beatty will come out and repair the lights, but we are asking to improve the quality and volume of lighting in this. Now, our colleagues over here are saying that that's not necessary. You can just ask Balfour Beatty for that. Believe me, you can't. So with this little windfall of money, and we've all had the black hole syndrome, and after the light came the dark, and black holes, etc., this is a lovely opportunity to get those black holes reinstated. As a town councillor, parish councillor, I know that we've got several black holes in, dare I say, St Neots. Oh, no applause. Oh, right. And it just seems an excellent way of getting this, spending this money. We're not putting it into the coffers, or are we? Are we spending it on something else? It's a bonus, it's a windfall. So let's use that windfall. And the working party might even come up with the idea of perhaps a local highway initiative should have a say in how this is spent in the particular local areas. I know that, all right, parish councils can spend their precept on the odd light, but, you know, we've got these holes, black holes, let's fill them with light, and let's just go for the final paragraph of this motion. And please don't vote too much against it, but I know you will. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Catt.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. There seems to be a reality gap. £384,000 appears in the paperwork under lighting PFI, and all of a sudden the hands go into the pot. I want to spend that here, there and everywhere, as if it's going to solve all the problems that we've heard about today. We know that the world isn't perfect. We know this contract isn't perfect. But to think that £384,000 is going to solve all of those issues we've heard about today, that's not a reality. And the reality of where that money is going, there are other pressures in this council, and that money isn't free to be spent. It's being used to balance against other priorities in the ETE area. And once a year we get to see the full council, and there we decide on how to reprioritise our balance of spending. And this kind of early clawback and desperate hands in the pot, trying to grab it for a specific reason, I don't think it solves any of the issues that you're talking about, but it certainly does get you some highlights and radio interviews for your political perspective on what's going on, how to appeal to residents. But if you do want to appeal to residents, then you go through the systems that we have got in place and try and get a fair amount of lighting that is reasonable and responsive, that is equal and equivalent to where we are across the rest of the county. It's not where we were a few years ago. The world isn't where we were a few years ago. But we did get a very large sum of money under this PFI contract that helps us with our finances, that required a 10% reduction in our lighting stock
in order to get that sum of money. And we're talking tens and tens and tens and tens and tens and tens and tens of millions of pounds in order to get that. I was disappointed with the confusion that a couple of members seem to have in discussing this motion, where there's a prerequisite in here to set up a working group and spend the money on the quality and volume of lighting. Yet we heard one councillor actually asking that some of the money goes to Cambridge City Council, because obviously they're hard up. And we had another councillor who proposed that the spending should be given back to local forums or groups of people or individuals that are affected. So they're actually talking against the motion in front of us and still saying, I wish to back that. I too, like Councillor Matthew Schutter, do want to recognise the altered motion. I'm not sure how it got altered, because apparently it was amended, but amendments are too late for today by Councillor Scott, so it was altered, and it was altered, but not by Councillor Scott, but by Tom Sanderson, because I know, because we agreed to it at the start of the meeting. But wherever that alteration or amendment did come from, it does recognise the rigorous approach to contract management undertaken by council officers, resulting in significant improved performance on the contract. And that significant improved performance includes the quality of the lighting in terms of them being on when they're supposed to be on, or repaired quickly. So part of this motion is flawed by the fact that it recognises the improvements overall already. So all in all, there's no doubt whatsoever that as well-intentioned as these motions appear to be, when listening as a concerned resident, they do not go near enough or far enough or intelligent enough to look at the county council finances or ETE finances as a whole and really address the issues that are at hand. So for that reason, I will definitely be voting against this.
Thank you. Councillor Dupre.
I thought I had detected the hand of Councillor Scutt in the alteration to the motion, because it was so much better as it was. Nonetheless, regardless, I shall be supporting it, and I do hope that everybody else will, because after all, what more appropriate a season of the year than now for us to all rise up as one and declare that the people who lived in darkness have seen a great light. Let's make some great light for the residents of Cambridgeshire. Thank you.
Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Chair. I think there are two issues here which I think have been confused. One is the number of columns that were replaced the old lighting system. And like a number of people, I find that a bit frustrating. On one street where they took away some lights, the ones they put back, they very kindly lit up all the beautiful branches of a tree by having the light inside the tree, which was, very useful. But the point is that we made a decision to save money, to not have the lights on at full brightness, that we would have them dimmer than that. And there was a huge debate about that. And many councils, as Councillor Jones replied, have put in their own money to make sure the lights are brighter. But unfortunately, despite the fact that, speaking now of Cambridge City, that they have done that there, the lighting, in my view, is still really not wonderfully adequate. It does have issues of safety. And I think in particular, it has issues about cyclists, who are, in many cases, on many of the streets, really quite difficult to see. And I have to say that it is partly their fault. Many of them do have a tendency to have no lights and to wear nighttime camouflage, looking beautiful in black. But nevertheless, it is a worry for people going about the city, if you happen to be driving, that you could miss cyclists and it's not very safe. And what I would like to see happen is that maybe we revisit that decision to have the lights on dimly, and that we perhaps get together with the districts, and that includes the city, to think about whether there's a way in which we can increase the brightness of the lights rather than, because I feel to some extent that if the lights are much brighter, the dark pools might well disappear. And one reason I would support a working party is that they may look at that decision we made and perhaps come forward with some revised suggestions whereby the pooling of resources from districts and this council could perhaps mean that the lights could be brighter overall. Thank you.
Thank you. There's been no other speakers registered, so I will now ask Councillor Taylor to speak as she reserved her right to speak. Then I will ask Councillor Sanderson to sum up. Okay? Councillor Taylor. I just ask you to press your button, please? Yes. Sorry? Thank you. So, oh, you're asking her to withdraw? No, she seconded. Sorry. Oh, right. Sorry. I think that will be ignored, and you will start from now. Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm very happy to be seconding this motion. I prefer the original to its sequel, but then that's always the way. We've talked about the rigorous contract management. Yes, I know that our small team of officers monitoring the contracts have been working hard on the contract, but I do believe it's the contract itself that is the problem. And I know that the councillors involved in drawing up that contract with Balfour Beatty have now acknowledged that if they had their time again, they would not be writing it in that way. Members have talked about the problems that we've had over a number of years and the current problems being a bit of a hangover. Well, yes, but I think it's interesting that this motion comes not from somebody who's been a councillor for a long time, but from Councillor Sanderson, who, as a new councillor, is obviously keenly aware in his own division and in other areas of Cambridgeshire that we've still got problems. I think the concerns and dissatisfaction over the way the lights have been implemented and continuing problems have united us all. As Councillor Kindersley said, I've had a lot of problems with the street light reductions in my area of Queen Edith. The worst problem we had was a hole left in the middle of the road outside shops. We actually had somebody in a wheelchair fall into that. It took 3 or 4 days for that to be sorted out. But I'm also aware of problems from all over the county, from St Neots, people in Wisbech, Gamlingay. People have come to HDI committee with petitions asking for reinstatements of streetlights because they can't cope with the darkness of the streets as they are. The Cambridgeshire Alliance of Independent Living, which campaigns for the rights of people with disabilities, came to see Councillor Hickford, the then chair of the committee, with myself and Councillor Kindersley, to argue on behalf of the partially sighted gentleman from Papworth, Madam Chair. You may have been in touch with him yourself. And there are 2 problems, the implementation and the removals. Well, implementations, those of you who've been on the council for a while have probably been glad to forget some of the worst excesses, as with any painful experience. But customer services and interaction with our residents was not what we would expect from the council. We had holes all over the streets, particularly in narrow streets in parts of Cambridge, such as Romsey and Petersfield. This actually meant that you couldn't use the pavement in a particular streets. Well, the implementation was awful. That is in the past. But the removals was another thing, and we're still suffering the effect of those removals. As Councillor Schutter pointed out, we had a reduction of 10% of the county's lights over the whole of Cambridgeshire. But because there were many roads which did not have any removals because they were main traffic routes, that meant that there was actually a higher percentage rate in smaller streets. Some areas in my division and others, that was 40% of the lights that were removed. As Councillor Wilson has pointed out, that was done in a rather random way because it was judged by whether the lights were deemed fit to last for the length of the contract or not. And it has left us with very dark spots. You know, in some of the streets in my area, if you're standing on one side of the street, you cannot see what's going on the other side of the street. That makes a lot of residents worried about going out at night. It means either they don't do that or they perhaps use cars where they wouldn't otherwise have done. There's many people out and about at night who need to be able to see their way around. You need to be able to see if you're a shift worker getting up early in the morning, perhaps going to a factory job that starts early. If you're a nurse going to a hospital job, or if you're working the nighttime economy. It's all very well to get a taxi home if you're going for a night out, but if you're actually working during the hours of darkness and you depend on street lighting to get to your bus stop or to cycle, then I think the loss of lighting does present a significant risk. Not everybody drives a car. It's also a big impact on elderly people who are a bit more unsteady on their feet. Okay, you can't see the curb, but for people who are blind or partially sighted, it is particularly bad. And as the Alliance told us, if you're partially sighted, then you rely on what little light you have, and you often use lights for wayfinding. So that Alliance represents people from all over Cambridgeshire, and they have told us that it's a significant risk. Nearly coming to an end, Madam Chair. We did make it clear in some examples of lights being removed that they were outside the homes of partially sighted people or the frail elderly, or areas with a high burglary rate, and it was dismaying to see that those lights were removed anyway. Well, my constituents are still angry about that. It sounds as if some of yours aren't. I'd just like to urge you to support the motion, which will give us an opportunity to put this right. Thank you.
Councillor Sanderson, as the original mover of the motion, I will ask you to sum up, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to thank Councillor Tierney for seconding this motion. It's very kind of him to do so. Team Scull.
Councillor Sanderson.
I'm sure I'll hear about it from him on Twitter later. But just a few points in response. Councillor Shooter and Councillor Count said there are less outages. Of course there are less outages because there's fewer columns to begin with. Let's be realistic about it. Councillor Shooter mentioned a hangover. Normally a hangover is a result of a good party. I don't think we've had that with Balfour Beatty, that's fair to say. My concern about this is, yeah, the performance has been bad. I welcome the measures that have been taken to address this, but it's still not addressing the main issue that we have all these columns that have been removed from areas that are causing us problems. Councillor Count mentioned that obviously the cost associated with that, which I fully accept, but we are proposing to spend some £700,000 to upgrade columns that we've already accrued from developers. We should have got them to pay for it before we took on those columns and adopted the residential areas. So I think we unfortunately do find ourselves in a bit of a bind. Of course, working party, if it was set up, may decide not to use this deduction to upgrade the columns. But I think we at least need to just clarify what we're going to do with it, where it can be used. Certainly would be happy if the Conservative group wanted to suggest something of their own in order to take this further. What I'm asking for is that we look into this, we consider it in more detail, and then perhaps report back to the appropriate committee in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sanderson. We will now move to the vote on this motion. No other speakers, we've had the summing up. Mrs Rowe, can you please take us through the voting, please?
Would members please press the blue button to indicate they are present? Members in favour of the motion, please press the green button marked plus. Members against the motion, please press the red button marked minus. Members wishing to abstain, please press the yellow button marked with a cross.
Thank you. Everybody who is present has voted. We're closing the voting.
I'm now closing the vote.
Hang on, we have a point of...
I think possibly another explanation is that there seems to be a discrepancy between what that's showing sometimes and what this is showing. It's now showing 53, but before the previous vote was saying 51. So I suspect it's because people are not in the chamber.
Yeah.
We have this, yeah. Basically, let's go from here. We'll have a chat later. Some people are voting, saying they're present and then not voting. We need to look at that.
Chairman, the result of the vote is 23 votes in favour, 29 against and 1 abstention. The motion is therefore lost.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That concludes discussion of the second motion. We now move to the third motion submitted by Councillor Jenkins. Before I ask Councillor Jenkins to move his motion, I understand that there is an alteration which has been circulated to all members. Can I ask for the meeting's consent, which will be signified without discussion? Are you happy that I accept that alteration? I'm accepting that as yes. Thank you. Can I therefore to move and speak to his motion as set out on the sheet circulated to all members? And can I please ask who the seconder is as well, please? Who is your seconder?
Happy to second, Chair.
Councillor Jenkins, if you'd like to speak to your motion.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks to Council for accepting the motion as altered, and thanks to Josh especially for his support, enabling me to come up with something which would, with a fair wind, have broad support within this chamber. And just to make people feel comfortable about process here, the amendment was received in due time on Monday morning. We did talk about it on Monday morning, and it was agreed between Josh and myself on Monday morning. So we did it.
You're saying cross-party support?
Yes. Thank you. Yeah. This appears to be a motion about music, Cambridgeshire music, but more importantly, it's about process. And I'll leave comments about music to other people in the chamber who can perhaps talk more passionately than I can, and just explain to you why the process part of this motion is important. It has its origins in a C&I decision of some weeks ago relating to the proposed Create project. I won't replay all of the details of that decision, but it was correctly taken given the status of information available at the time. With hindsight, it's realised that the decision itself was a bit previous, and there are a number of strategic and tactical questions which it would have been appropriate to answer before taking that decision. Now, as a result of all that, and it's a generic issue because of the role of C&I, there's an excellent paper from Officer Mallion coming to the C&I committee next week. So this motion has its origin in the process which relates to decisions at C&I, and it came up because of the decision relating to the Create project. And what it says is that we should actually follow through an appropriate process of strategy first, then tactics, and then make the operational decisions. It's not a decision about the Create project as such. And in fact, the Create project is not even mentioned in the motion now, and that is appropriate. But I would ask those people in the council chamber who might be uneasy about that to rest easy, because that's just the operational manifestation of going through a proper strategy tactics exercise. And the motion itself does say quite explicitly, look at the Cambridgeshire music strategy with particular reference to the digital component thereof, which is what the Create project was all about. And by the way, it may well be as a result of that project that the current pattern of the Create project changes. Who knows? That's what happens when you do strategic reviews. But this is going to be done properly. The motion talks about the establishment of a panel to do this exercise properly. A panel drawn from Children's Committee, which is responsible for educating people and giving them the right start in life, and C&I, which is the committee with operational oversight of traded services. It's going to be a panel, not a subcommittee, because it's easier to set up a panel. Subcommittees sound better and more official, but we'd have to go through constitution and ethics and all sorts of stuff to get that set up. With a panel or a working party or whatever, call it what you wish, you can get it up and running straight away. So we're having a panel. We did scratch our heads to see if we'd come up with a stronger name, but we couldn't, so we're stuck with panel. And that panel will comprise people from Children's Committee and CNI, and will be charged with doing the job properly between now and the end of March, and reporting back then. That's only the first 3 months of next year. So the call to action here is on this council to do something, set up the panel, and for the panel to report. Now, apologies for the syntax in the call to action. It doesn't read too well, but I'm sure everybody understands it. It's a good motion. It will correct probably a bit of a glitch in what we did a couple of months ago, or it'll enable us to take the right actions in the future. I do ask you to support it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Jenkins.
No.
Yeah. Thank you. I rise to my feet because I'm actually, my concern in relation to this motion arises out of the briefing note that's come. I just refer to the briefing note because what it says is that in October, the Commercial Investments Committee resolved to A, designate the site St Luke's Barn as surplus to requirements, in inverted commas, surplus to requirements, and pursue a negotiated cash purchase of the site. I refer all members to the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough devolution deal. Article 22 of that devolution deal says this: to support delivery of these commitments, that is new homes and sustainable communities, the combined authority and government agreed to A, establish a joint investments and assets board to review all land and property, including surplus property and land held by, amongst others, local authorities. Now, it does go on to say only assets agreed by local authorities and members of the board will be in scope for review. But I draw it to the attention of the Commercial Investments Committee, don't ever say in your decisions that any property of this council is surplus to requirements. If I were the mayor, I would have my eye on this determination that was made by the Commercial Investments Committee in October to say that St Luke's Barn is surplus to requirements. And I would have my eye on Article 22 of the Cambridgeshire-Peterborough devolution deal. Don't ever do it. Don't say it's surplus to requirements. As I say, if I were the mayor, I would be out there at the ready looking to whatever you determine is surplus to requirements, and I would be into grabbing it.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. Councillor.
Thank you. I am very pleased that this alteration means that this motion will get cross-party support in this chamber. I am one of the councillors who is a little concerned, as Councillor Jenkins referred, to the fact that the name of the Create project has been dropped from it. But Councillor Jenkins has reassured me that it's all going to go well, and I hope very much that he's right, and I look forward to this panel doing some excellent work looking at this project, but also about music education in Cambridge more broadly, and a digital strategy for education in Cambridgeshire, which is actually really important. I know, having grown up in the wilds of Cornwall, that the opportunities that were available to me when I was at school are very much less than the opportunities that are available to my children growing up in Cambridge. And part of the purpose of the Create project and this digital strategy is that now that we have the amazing facilities that the internet provides, those kind of opportunities that are available to my children growing up in Cambridge should be available to many, many more children across our widely rural county. And I am really passionate about making sure that we make the most of those opportunities, that they are incredibly important, that we use the benefits of the digital economy to educate and to provide not just musical opportunities, but just the whole range of amazing speakers who come into this city but don't necessarily go across the whole county. So I am really pleased that this project, this motion is now going to get support, but it is important that we make sure that we then do the work afterwards of making sure that we make the most of those opportunities for our children. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Downs.
Yes, thank you very much. Councillor Jenkins has rightly focused on the process by which we got into this situation. I want to speak about the project that started this off And I'd like to refer in particular to the briefing note, second page, the second paragraph, the first sentence, which says the value of a music education in children's academic and social development is well documented. I just want to give my very wholehearted support to that statement, and therefore to say that it is an important responsibility of any council to do whatever it can to support music education. As Lucy has already said, the number of opportunities have gone down dramatically in the last few years, and if this is an opportunity to do something about it, then we should seize it. Why? Because it is extremely well documented that music adds value not only to children's social life, but to their academic performance. Now, some people might be slightly surprised by that. Well, how do I know that? Well, because I used to measure very carefully the performance of young people at 16 compared with their verbal reading scores at 11. And lo and behold, we used to find that the majority of youngsters who are bright, if you like, at 11, do well at GCSE. We measure them every year. But it was interesting to note that some people diverted from the norm. They were outliers, either better than expected or worse than expected. And so, with my colleagues, we looked very carefully at all the individuals to try to identify characteristics which might explain why they were outliers from the normal pattern. And we found, over a number of years, that the most striking factor in the overperformers was participation in music. Now, the debate was that a causal link or a correlational link? Because what we might simply have been doing was identifying children from middle-class families who could afford to pay for lessons. But we looked at it very carefully, and we found that across the ability range and across the social range, those children who took part in music did better in all their subjects overall when they reached 16. And I think that gives us a very clear steer that we should use whatever we can to redress the imbalance in the curriculum that has developed in recent years. I want to add one further point. Not only is investment in music good for the academic performance of young children, it's also an investment for life. If you have the opportunity to take part in music, be it instrumental or choral or whatever, that stays with you right through your life. Other things that you do at school, like football and hockey and netball and volleyball and cricket and rugby, you have to give them up because you reach a certain age. But with music, you can go on. It stays with you. And that, therefore, is an investment in the quality of life of people looking ahead. And this was brought home to me last Friday when I was taking part in a choral concert. And I looked round the choir and realised I was one of the youngest members of it. And I'm 79. So that gives you an indication. There was a group of people still enjoying singing, taking part well into their 70s, 80s and 90s. And that's because they were privileged to have a musical education.
Thank you. Councillor Cab.
Last week, while we were at the school service at King's College, I had the opportunity to sort of contemplate the importance of music in the lives of I had the opportunity to contemplate the importance of music, and I remember that phrase, you know, if music be the food of love, play on. And then, with all due respect to Shakespeare, I think it could be changed to, you know, if music be the food of education, invest on. And when I read the report on the Create project, I was just really pleased to see that the Arts Council are willing to put £1 million into that project. But then when I was reading about the rocky road that the discussions took the Create project, I started worrying about that investment. Because I was worrying about the youngsters who were there at that King's College carol service. I was thinking in mind my own family experience. I mean, in my house, I can just about put the CD player on. Whereas my daughter, she had this ambition to learn the saxophone. And it's thanks to her comprehensive school, her inspired head of music and all the staff there, and also to Cambridgeshire SEMA. And I also would like to sort of mention Matthew Gunn, you know, our charismatic kind of leader of music in the county, who does so much to develop projects, inspire everyone across the county to get involved in music. So I'm really pleased that this motion has been brought by Councillor Jenkins, and I fully support it, because as has been mentioned earlier, is the importance of education and music in education just has to be recognised, and let's take this forward and celebrate what we have achieved and build on with this CREATE project in particular, a future for our young people in Cambridgeshire.
Thank you. I have 3 more speakers. Councillor Count is next. There's Councillor Bradnam and Councillor Rains. They are on there to speak. I will then ask Councillor Schumann as the seconder to speak, then Councillor Jenkins to sum up. Okay? We have had quite a few speakers.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yeah, delighted to support this altered motion. I think that it's almost understated on occasion, the link between educational outcomes and the learning of music at an early stage in your formative life. The evidence is out there. Councillor Downs has referred to it already. It's in the briefing note as well. And this week, there was even more evidence coming out, not just about educational outcomes, but actually what happens inside the brain when people are engaged in music in such a positive way that it was quite obvious to see that the backing for the evidence has got scientific reasoning because of what actually happens in the brain in that particular point in time. So therefore, enhancing or reviewing the way that we look at music and the way that we deliver it has many, many more benefits than just simply the inspiring people to take up, listen to, play, sing, get involved in music. It has significant impacts for them in later life. And with the strategy that we're looking at, which has been around for a while, it gets refreshed every now and then, the world is changing, and digital music and the ability to deliver digital music, the ability to deliver digital lessons, to be heard, to be listened to be educated at distance, is a new phenomenon that's expanding all the while, and is something that actually changes the way that we can go about enhancing the music enjoyment in our county. And therefore I think it's very worthy of reviewing the strategy early, particularly in that sphere, to see what changes might be brought about. Because the evidence says that if we can increase the music take-up, then there will be educational and health outcomes alongside. Some particular focus I'd like to put into this strategy when it's reviewed by the working group, the party, is when we was looking at the projects earlier on, I asked about the engagement with schools such as the Thomas Clarkson at Wisbech, and it was almost negligible. I'm not sure if the answer was 0 or almost not noticeable, and yet that is in an area of highest deprivation and poorest, lowest educational standards. Now, is that because they go cross-border over to perhaps a Norfolk company or something else? Because this is traded arms, I don't know. But I do know this, that when we address this strategy, we actually need to focus on areas of poor educational achievement to see how our strategy addresses that, because that is the point of us having a Cambridge Music. That is the point of us engaging in music. That is the point of trying to reach more and more people. As you know, I'm also on the combined authority, so I just want to pick up on a pertinent point that was raised about surplus assets. When this council or other councils or the NHS or the police declare an asset as surplus requirements, it does not mean that the combined authority gets the opportunity to come along, swallow it up and take it over and take the proceeds for itself. What it does mean is it's in a strategic position to look at other organisations' surplus assets and to see if there are better projects that can come forward and unite them as a whole. So projects that, you know, we've seen in the past that have been discussed and some have gone forward, some haven't, might have been, for example, in Cambridge City where you had the fire station and the police station, the use of the fire station in Wisbech. Those things that previously were under the MAC and other, the One Public Estate programme, there's now a nice area for these things to be looked at in the whole. But it is absolutely in this county council's interest to protect the the financial value of those assets should anything come forward as suggestions from the combined authority. I don't want people to get overly fixated on the past and the CREATE project. It has opened up an opportunity for this discussion and a realisation that the world in front of us is not the same as the world that we leave behind us, particularly in terms of digital. But a second thing that does concern me is digital is not the answer to everything. It is all very well for me to watch Arsenal on TV or Tottenham on TV. It is not the same as being at a football game. And whilst I appreciate all the advantages that Cambridge City has in attracting some of the finest talent from around the world, I don't want to see that as an easy get-out to never bring it out to the reaches of East Cambridgeshire, South Cambridgeshire, Fenland, Huntingdonshire, or Fenland. So please don't let it just stick there. And in summing up very quickly, yes, please do come up with a new strategy, a revised strategy, but please look at the reason why we're having that strategy. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Councillor Bradley.
I heartily endorse this motion and the amendment. Those of us who attended a member seminar last Friday were given a presentation about music therapy, and I recognise that that is a very particular and specialised skill and profession. But the general principles that were outlined there, I think, might be interesting for people who were not able to attend. The point that Orla Casey made was that music has the potential to move and inspire us and inspire everyone in some way or other. And that ability to be stimulated is unaffected by illness, age, or mental state. And so when people are in illness or old age or in a difficult mental situation, music can be used to come alongside them. And in our own lives, just in an everyday way, the value of music in our lives to engage with us in that way means that we can come alongside people and we can engage. And indeed, the other initiative that's been brought about more recently is the reducing loneliness in Cambridgeshire. And actually, strangely, quite a lot of the activities that people described to us were to do with music, taking part in a choir and singing. But that sort of thing, enabling music to be projected out into the parts of our county that are less accessible. But then, of course, people do take part because they can join in a digital, with a digital choir. It's not the only way, but it does enable that to happen. So I heartily endorse this. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Councillor Ray.
Thank you, Chairman. Point on process and a point on strategy. And on music, I just want to go back to Councillor Scott's observations about the importance of classics. So, music has been part of the curriculum since, I think, a chap called Pythagoras. Its educational value is indisputable, and that's already been discussed. But its value for mental health, all kinds of other reasons, and I really recommend, on the back of that presentation on Friday, anybody who can to talk to Councillor Wotherspoon about the role of music in medieval Islamic medical provision. But that leads on to the relationship between process and strategy. We're absolutely right to be considering this because the process around the decision-making in the C&I committee left people unhappy. Whether it was good process or bad process, it left people feeling that we hadn't really got to the bottom of it. So it is right that we should be looking at some way of actually understanding what was going on. But then the third point is strategy. And I would just say this, it's absolutely right to start with strategy and then move on to what that strategy implies. And so I would encourage
as a consequence of this motion, whatever panel is set up, not to jump straight into a discussion about individual projects, but to think about what we're trying to achieve. And secondly, and here I echo something that Councillor Count has already said, we are the County Council for Cambridgeshire, for all of Cambridgeshire, with all of its different communities. This city, with a chapel, an amazing musical provision for every single one of its colleges, obviously has an amazing musical richness and marvellous things happen at West Road. But actually over the last week or so, I've listened to marvellous things happening in Ely Cathedral and in schools around there, and in my own division of Soham, there is fantastic musical theatre provided by a theatre company called Viva. As we consider what the strategy implies in terms of subsequent projects, it's got to be for the whole of the county, and we need to think about how digital can be an enabler for that, rather than getting too tied into issues of individual projects and geography.
Thank you. Councillor Schumann, do you have any comments to make?
I'll try and keep it brief. I think we have a clear consensus, but I just want to pick up a few points that have been mentioned. To start with saying, Councillor Downs, yes, since I've been in short trousers and before, I've had a passion for the arts and education, and I can absolutely corroborate and endorse the comments from Councillor Downs. I personally know people who have benefited from the commitment to the arts that has absolutely shaped their futures and careers, and without it, I can say with almost certainty, they wouldn't be doing what they do today successfully without that input of music and arts. Councillor Count picked up the point on the Mayor, and I don't think for one second the Mayor and the Combined Authority are in the process or in the practice of swooping in and snatching property off us the moment we declare it surplus to requirement. But I think the word of warning is something which I know we are looking at this Council's process about whether surplus to requirement is just something that will become the norm in our processes, or actually if it is something that we do as a matter of course, and that is being reviewed currently. I was lucky enough as a director of an education trust to go into a school recently, and I observed a lesson which the teacher delivered the lesson from a video which all students were accessing through a computer screen. And and opportunities this provided the whole class. We often talk about in education, and Councillor Downs will know, about supporting those that are disadvantaged or helping and going as fast as those the slowest members of the class. The idea of having a video that students were pausing, going back and re-watching of the teacher who had pre-recorded this was enabling all students to work at a pace which is appropriate to them. So we absolutely cannot underestimate the opportunities around digital education. And that's just a very basic example of what is options available to us. Councillor Count mentioned very importantly about the making sure we look at the strategy and focus on areas of deprivation as well. And I think that's an incredibly important point, and we should take that back to the panel and stress that importance. And I feel obliged, sat in this seat here, remembering our previous county councillor, Councillor Hipkin, who banged the drum very often about supporting our most deprived communities. And I think that needs to be at the forefront of the strategy and at the minds of the members when appointed. I'd like to end by saying I just pass on my thanks to Councillor Jenkins for bringing this and for his kind support in the changes that I recommended. And the changes were very much about making sure we had a call to action and a clear direction of what we're going to do as part of this motion. To thank Councillor Jenkins for that, but more importantly thank Councillor Bywater, who has assisted in the shaping of this motion, and Councillor Hay, Councillor Hay was responsible for the removal of the CREATE project. And I am pleased we did, because it's something we could have got tied up in, and we could have lost the sentiment of what this is about. And that was why it was removed. It was removed for no other reason but to make sure that we focused on moving forward and looking at the positive impact of this motion today. I think we have a consensus, and I'm sure we'll hopefully see so in the vote. And with a full support of this council, I'm sure it'll be music to everyone's ears.
Thank you. Councillor Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair. And I feel this debate has already been summed up 3 or 4 times by other people already, so there's no need for me to go on. I do get the feeling we're starting to get into the situation of, you know, music can solve every problem. All we need to do is to invest more in music. And I think we've got to stay a little bit realistic here. You know, we've got Cambridgeshire music here in a corner. We don't want it taking over the entire room, but maybe we can allow it out a little bit. I did work for a company once that went through an exercise of developing its 90-day strategy. And I thought, that sounds like long-term thinking. But no, it was a strategy developed in 90 days, and we have got 90 days to do this job now. And I don't know how quickly Children's Committee can come up with its members of the panel, but C&I can think about that next Friday, I guess. We do need to keep focus and deliver something quickly, and we do need to avoid thinking about justifying answers that people want to have justified. There is an open mind here, and you know, I'll use the C word. The CREATE project may in fact come back on the table in connection with St Luke's Barn, or it may not, because the strategy has determined something else. But at least we'll have gone through the thinking process correctly, and there will be many who won't allow us to forget it as an option. But thanks everybody for their very kind support during the morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jenkins. As everyone does seem in agreement, I am going to take the vote by show of hands. Is everybody happy with that? Those in favour? Thank you. That concludes discussion of the third motion. We now move to the fourth motion submitted by Councillor Meschini. I understand it's the one that's on the mauve paper. You're proposing. Who is your seconder? You're seconding. I understand that this is also in general agreement. We'll see through the debate. Okay. It's on the mauve paper that we are now looking at. Motion by Councillor Meschini.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I must first of all apologise. I have the most terrible cold, so I hope I'm carrying. And if I break down in cough, please forgive me. As a union member and my own workplace representative for many years, this motion is very dear to my heart. As I understand it, since it was written, there has been some changes in the situation, and this is where the modifications have actually come about. Since the motion was written, we have had an offer of a 2% pay increase for our local government staff, and the Labour Party has welcomed this offer. The problem remained, of course, that while this council has already budgeted for a 1% pay increase for our local government staff, there was no clear resolution as to where the other 1% that was recommended was going to come from. What I would like actually to say is that with this motion that I'm bringing with me, and with the kind support of the people that have contributed to the modifications that have been made, we have a real opportunity to make a difference in the lives of people that we, as a council, are responsible for. I mean, these people have had a pay freeze for the last 3 years and have experienced a 21% decrease in their income in real terms. This is something that we can really do to express our support to people that do wonderful work for us. So I do please urge my friends around the chamber to actually support me in this motion. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Well done. Okay.
Wonderful, because I have no more voice. Right, I really need to go.
That concludes discussions on the motions. Next is item 9, questions. A. Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority and Overview and Scrutiny Committee, Council Rule 9.1. Right, let's start again. Next we consider item 9, Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority and Overview and Scrutiny Oral Questions, which will be dealt with in accordance with the protocol set out in Annex 1 of Part 4.1 Council Procedural Rules of the Council's Constitution. The generic report summarising the decisions made by the combined authorities' formal committees is included on the Council agenda on pages 7 to 31. The deadline for submitting questions was Tuesday the 5th of December. I have received 4 questions for Councillor Count, the Councillor's representative on the combined authority, from Councillor Netsinger. I believe we're taking the questions one by one. Can I ask you to ask your first question, please?
Just on a point of procedure, I would be perfectly happy to take the first 3 questions as one, in the interests of going and having some lunch, and then doing the second one separately, if Councillor Count's happy with that. Okay, so the first questions are, bearing in mind the decision of the Mayor to loan the Chief Executive from the Combined Authority to the Local Enterprise Partnership, as set out in item 3.3 of the decision summary of the meeting on the 29th of November, could the Leader of the Council give an update on the current situation on the relationship between the LEP and the Combined Authority? Could he give his view on whether the relationship between the LEP and the Combined Authority is currently constructive and positive? And does the Combined Authority have any plans for further interventions in any other local partnership bodies within Cambridgeshire?
At your first three? Yeah. Oh, right.
Slightly confused there. Right, okay. I'll go with the answers that I've been given assistance with, so I don't miss anything out, but I will try and get through it well. The Greater Cambridgeshire and Greater Peterborough area has huge economic potential. If this potential is to be realised, a powerful partnership needs to exist between the public and private sectors. There's a report on the LEP board on the 19th of December to consider how a series of new arrangements could strengthen the strategic leadership of the area, create a new model of local enterprise partnership, and provide the best value for the public purse. That was to assist with question 1. Question 2, there has been a formal request from government for the GCGP LEP to address how the LEP can, first of all, restore public sector confidence in its activities and it can deliver against the government's core mission. Secondly, work with the Combined Authority to ensure a shared strategy for growth and efficient ways of working, including the removal of unnecessary executive duplication. And thirdly, the sign-off on a comprehensive set of financial accounts covering the operational budget of the GCGP LEP. The Combined Authority and the LEP will work constructively together to address these issues to ensure that all funding streams for the area are protected. That was largely for your second question. The third one, this was not a takeover by the Combined Authority. As stated, the government had a number of concerns about the leadership of the LEP and have asked the LEP to address these. It is in the interests of the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough area for the Combined Authority to work with the LEP and the government to ensure that the LEP is complying with the national framework and existing standards of governance, transparency and scrutiny so that funding is restored to the area. Thank you.
Councillor Count, in answering the second question, has he said it was part of the government's core mission and that they will work constructively. It doesn't sound as if that's necessarily very positive or friendly, and I hope very much that the LEP, following the intervention of the government and the Combined Authority, will continue to work as an independent body, and that the relationships between the Combined Authority and the LEP will improve in the coming months. On the final question, a lot of Councillor Count's answers have focused on the intervention of government. I think it was felt that the intervention of government came partly as a response to interventions by local MPs, and I hope very much that local partnerships will continue to work independently and not be interfered with by government as a result of interventions by MPs. But we shall see. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Count, would you like to come back on that or not?
The first part was about the government's core mission, and by that, by way of further explanation, so it's not misunderstood, I think this might have happened. The government's core mission is to deliver sustainable economic growth in the area, and that's what I meant by delivering the government's core mission, is to find the local network and design the local network capable of delivering that. In terms of the second part, I'm not sure where you've gone with this. It's neither ended in a question nor moved on to force. I really can't help.
Thank you. Councillor.
Okay, a fourth question. The recent Combined Authority Board reviewed a paper on a levy of this council by the Combined Authority. I am concerned that the levy will tie this council into making a fixed payment to the Combined Authority without any regard being given to other calls on this council's financial position? Can the leader reassure this council that services to older people or children will not suffer greater cuts than would otherwise have been the case as a result of the Combined Authority levy?
Councillor Count.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So the first part about the levy is the levy was part of the devolution document that went through the full scrutiny of the full council, and we all understood it and what it meant in terms of how it's applied and how it's voted for. And the statutory instrument about how that's delivered is the simple terminology of moving forwards. Now, to agree a levy, that needs to go through the Combined Authority Board on which I sit, and the levy is applied to transport functions, and the County Council has the power of veto on the budget for that. So therefore, it definitely has due consideration of the impact on this council as we move forward to discuss any potential levies that may or may not come about. In terms of the first year of, I don't know the words, operation, so the 17-18, because the Combined Authority came into effect, the transport money that used to flow directly to us went to the Combined Authority, and they simply passported the same as was in our budgets. So we delivered our transport functions in exactly the same way, and this is understood to be the same for 18-19. The levy is the statutory instrument where instead of having that arrangement, it is potential to have different arrangements. It's necessary to have that in effect. The statutory instrument also did cover the possibility of borrowing powers. In terms of cuts that would affect public sector, whether it be older people or children, I hope to remind this council that public sector reform is part of the Combined Authority's agenda, and the aim of that is to ensure better outcomes for our residents, including older people and children. So hopefully that will satisfy as an answer.
Councillor Singer, do you have a supplementary?
Yes, I'm reassured to hear that the levy is comes under the budget, and that therefore Councillor Count will have a veto on the levy if it's felt that would have a detrimental impact on this council. And I hope very much that he will make it entirely clear to the Combined Authority that if the levy would be putting increasing strain on other services at this council, he would use that veto.
Councillor Count.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and to be perfectly candid, and you mentioned it earlier on about partner organisations, the Combined Authority is a partner organisation. It is not, it's not the enemy, so to speak. It's not there to actually subjugate us or master us in that way. And so when I make it perfectly clear in your words, that is more in the nature of helping them to understand the needs of this council rather than any thoughts in my head at this particular point in time. I'm going to be using the veto vote, because that would simply indicate that conversations have failed and I've failed to make myself understood. So hopefully that will provide some reassurance.
Thank you, Councillor Netsinger, for your questions. I have received no questions for Councillors French and Netsinger on the Council's representatives on the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. We therefore move on to written questions. Responses to the 6 written questions received have been provided to the political groups before the meeting and published on the Council's website. That does conclude the business of today on the agenda. Can I wish everybody a happy Christmas? Hang on, Councillor Count would like to say something. Councillor Count?
No, but it was to follow on from you, but as leader of the council, I too, as leader of the council, I'd like to wish all the members a Merry Christmas and a fantastic New Year. But I'd also really like to thank the Chair for the great handling this year, the Vice Chair as well. I'd like to thank Democratic Services, and can I ask Julian Beasley in particular, on behalf of all of us inside the council, to pass on our intrinsic thanks to all of the officers that have supported us so well throughout the year. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Nobody else has indicated they wish to speak. Thank you very much. There's still carols at 1:30 if anybody wants to join us. This is how quick everybody can get out of Shire Hall, isn't it? I just